Alright, welcome guys. Today we are going to be doing my favorite recipe as far as desserts, and that is a cheesecake. Now, today's demo is going to be a little bit more detailed just because there are more steps with a cheesecake, but the final product is amazing. It's a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and get started. So, as far as the ingredients for today, let's start with the graham cracker crust. So the graham cracker crust you're going to need for this cheesecake. Now keep in mind the amounts I'm going to give are going to be for a smaller cheesecake. You can scale this up if you would like. So for the crust you're going to need 3 ounces or 5 sheets of graham cracker. So that's 5 longer crackers. 2 tablespoons of white sugar. And 2 ounces or 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter melted. Now optional, if you want, you can add in a eighth or a pinch of cinnamon, or sorry, an eighth of a teaspoon of cinnamon, but that's up to you. As far as the cheesecake part, you're going to need 10 ounces of cream cheese. Now, I do not have a volume measurement for that, because if you take a cream cheese package, you'll see there is the weight measurements right on the package. So you're gonna need 2 blocks. 1 block you'll use the entire thing, and then the next block you'll need to cut off 2 ounces of that. Okay, so continuing on, 5 ounces or half of a cup of sour cream, half a teaspoon of kosher salt. Now remember, if you're using regular salt, that would be a full teaspoon. Again, if you have not switched to kosher salt, I would definitely recommend it. 1 tablespoon of vanilla, 1 whole egg, and 2 egg yolks. Okay, I'm going to show you, remind you guys how to separate those. And then 1.5 ounces of heavy cream. Now you can up this to 2 ounces if you would like. I've kind of gone in between 1.5 and 2 ounces here. That would be a little less than 1/4 of a cup. So if you're going with 1.5 ounces, that would be just under a 1/4 of a cup. If you're going for 2 ounces, that's exactly 1/4 of a cup. The difference is just a slight difference with the texture. 1.5 ounces will give you a cheesecake that's a little easier to slice. 2 ounces will give you a cheesecake that is a little creamier, though a little harder to cut into. Okay. Now, also later in this demo, I'm going to show you how to make a chocolate ganache sauce, and I'm also going to show you how to make a salted caramel sauce. All right, but for right now, let's go to our first step, which, if you remember from our lesson, first step is to prepare your pan. Now, today, I'm going to be using what is called a springform pan. Now, this one, as you can see, is wrapped up in foil. Let me go ahead and get another springform pan to show you what that's like. Okay, so a springform pan here is basically a 2-part pan. One where it has a little latch here that you can unlock and take the bottom out. Now, this is helpful for cheesecakes because you can easily, after the cake is done baking, you can just simply remove the sides and you have the finished cheesecake there. Now, the only problem with this is because it comes apart in 2 pieces, and we're baking this cheesecake in a water bath, is that you'll have water leak into the cheesecake. The way that we prevent that from happening is that we basically wrap up the bottom of this with 2 layers of foil. Okay? So what I'm going to do to prepare my pan, that's step 1, is I'm going to give it a quick spray, both on the bottom and make sure I get the sides. Okay, and after we're done spraying, we're going to cut a piece of parchment paper for this. So here, obviously, when you have your parchment paper, it's a square round, but yet this is a round pan. So how do we make a cake pan? Well, watch carefully. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sheet of parchment paper and I'm going to fold it in half. I'm going to then fold that in half the other way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it over into a triangle. And then I'm going to do that twice more. So I'm going to fold it into a thinner triangle. And then go over once more. Then, using either a knife or a pair of scissors, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of put the center of the point right in the middle of the pan. And then I'm going to just take my scissors, cut, and now I have a cake round. I'm then going to spray that. Now, one other thing you can do is if you're using a regular cake pan, if you do not have a springform pan, you can make this in a regular cake pan, whether it's a full-size one here or a small one, is you may want to actually put parchment paper on the outside as well. In this case, what you would do is just take some parchment paper, line the outside of it, just press it up right against the edge. That way, when you take the cheesecake out of the pan, you're able to release it a lot easier. Because I'm using a springform pan, I'm not as concerned about that because I can just simply remove the sides. But you do want to make sure that the sides are properly oiled and greased. And there we go. There's our springform pan ready to go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to preheat the oven, second step here, to 350 degrees. And we're going to form the crust. So in order to do that, I'm going to crush the graham crackers. Now, if you're using graham cracker crumbs, obviously you don't need to worry about this. You can do this in a food processor. You can break it up by hand. My favorite way of doing it, best way to work out any anger issues you have, is just put into a plastic bag and just smash them to dust. And there you go. Take out all your 2020 feelings out on this thing. All right. So now what I'm going to do, this is step 3, is I'm going to combine the graham crackers, the sugar, I'm going to use a pinch of cinnamon here, and the melted butter. And I'm just going to combine this together until the graham crackers just come together and to form kind of like a wet sand. Alright, make sure all the graham crackers are fully coated. You know it's thoroughly mixed when you can take your hand, squeeze a little bit together, and it holds its shape just like that. Alright, so now what I'm going to do, this is part of the same step, so step 3, is I'm going to press this into the bottom of my cheesecake pan. So I'm just going to take my hand and just press it right down. Now, if you're using a really wide pan, like an 8-inch or a 9-inch pan, you may need to up the amount of the graham cracker crust just by a little bit. I would say by 50%. So how do you do that? How you would calculate that is just take the amounts for the graham cracker crust, multiply it by 1.5. So you would use 4.5 ounces of graham crackers, 1.1 tablespoons of sugar, and then 3 ounces or 6 tablespoons of butter, and that should get you enough to fill the bottom. Okay, so here though, that is perfect. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into my 350 degree oven for about 10 minutes or so until the crust is a little bit golden brown, nice and crispy. And while that is baking, I'm gonna get started on the cheesecake filling. All right, now while my graham cracker crust is blind baking, I'm going to make the cheesecake part. So in a bowl, this is step 4, I'm going to add in my cream cheese and nothing else. That's right. So step 4 is just to simply beat this until it is completely smooth. One thing about cream cheese is that no matter how much you mix it, if the cream cheese is not smooth before you add in other ingredients, it will never smooth out. So we have to make sure that this is completely smooth before we go and do anything else. I cannot emphasize this step enough. Make sure that the cream cheese is completely smooth. You need to scrape down the sides of the bowl. You are going to be scraping down the sides of the bowl a couple times here, so make sure that you are doing this quite often. Again, cheesecakes are great and they're delicious, but you really have to make sure that they're smooth. And the way you do that is by making sure you scrape down the sides of the bowl. All right, so now we go on to our next step, which is step 5, is I'm going to add in the sugar and the kosher salt. All right. Do not think the salt is an optional ingredient. Remember, cheesecake is full of fat and sugar, and it's very, very rich. You need salt in order to kind of counteract that and bring out the flavor. Just because it's dessert doesn't mean you shouldn't season it. Okay, I'm gonna mix this together just until it's smooth. At this point, it should kind of look like cream cheese frosting. Gonna scrape down the sides a bit here. Okay. And part of the same step, so still with step 5, is I'm going to add in the sour cream. The sour cream not only will add a nice pleasant tang to the cheesecake and add in a great flavor, it's also going to help this custard be a lot creamier and a lot thicker. Or, sorry, a lot more rich. My bad. All right. Now, make sure you're scraping down the paddle and the sides. Okay, if we were to have skipped the step where we were creaming together just the cream cheese, you would see at this point you would have big lumps and curds in your cheesecake batter, and that would never smooth out. You would have this almost like cottage cheese texture to your cheesecake. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to now add in my eggs. So this is step 6. Is I'm going to add in the eggs one at a time. But before I do that, I want to show you guys how to separate the eggs quickly. All right, with separating eggs, I need 1 whole egg and 2 egg yolks. So to do that, I'm just going to simply take my fingers, just part them a little bit, and just let the white just flow right through, and put my egg yolk there. Now, unlike when we were making a meringue where you couldn't get any drop of egg yolk into the egg white, if you get a little bit of white into your egg yolks, that is totally fine. So, got my 2 egg yolks. The egg yolks, remember, will lead to a more creamier, smoother custard. And then I'm going to add in the 1 whole egg. Make sure I don't have any shells in there. Nope, we're good to go. Alright, so now back to the mixer. I'm going to let this go at about a medium-low speed. I'm going to add in the eggs one at a time. So, plop. Now, it's important that you wait until the egg is completely gone. All right, add in another one. And add in the next one. Now the reason you don't want to add in all of the eggs at once is because you're basically trying to mix water and fat together. We have water and a little bit of fat in the egg yolks. We have a ton of fat in here. If we were to just add in all of the eggs at once, we would basically have a broken cheesecake mix. So what we do is we introduce them slowly, which helps it form an emulsion, which keeps it smooth and keeps it creamy. So once again, I know I sound like a broken record, but I can't emphasize it enough. Scrape down the sides of the bowl. Scrape down the paddles. Scrape down the whisk, whatever you're using. Okay. Yes, I know it's a bit of a pain, but you gotta do it. Now we go on to step 7. Now from this point on, because we have eggs in there, eggs, as you know from our angel food cake, will incorporate air if you beat them. Normally that is a good thing. In a cheesecake, you don't want that. Okay, so from this point on, this mixer does not go above medium speed. So I'm going to turn on the speed to about a little bit higher than just the lowest setting, and I'm going to add in my vanilla and the cream. So add in the vanilla and add in the cream. All right, and when it's mixed together, guess what? You're gonna stop it, scrape down the sides of the bowl. Okay. Now, if you remember from our lesson, one of the important steps that you have to take during this stage, and I'm sure I really have to twist some of your guys' arms in order to do this, is taste the cheesecake batter. Just take a small spoon, and you're tasting for not only sweetness, but also to see if it needs a little bit more salt, if it needs a little bit of acidity. Now, if you've ever tasted something and it tastes good, but it's missing a little something, most people usually at that point reach for salt or reach for pepper. Cooks reach for salt. Chefs reach for acid, whether it's in the form of vinegars or whether it's in the form of lemon or lime juice. Now, I'm gonna taste this. If it tastes good, but it's missing that little something, I'm gonna add in a squeeze of lime juice into this. Not to make it taste like limes, but that acid will help bring out the other flavors in this cheesecake. So let me taste that. Okay, it's plenty good as far as the acidity. However, it definitely needs a little bit more sweetness. The cream cheese I got seems to be a little bit tart. So I'm gonna add in another tablespoon or 2 of sugar, and then I'm going to mix that in and then taste it again. So bring the mixer up. Okay, taste it again. Getting there. Just needs a little more. And I also think it needs just a tad more vanilla. Now, normally I would say don't over sweeten something, but since this cheesecake is going to be served cold, you actually want to make it maybe just a touch too sweet, because when the cold hits the cheesecake and when you taste it when it's cold, it's actually going to taste less sweet that way. So you almost like ice cream, you want to make it a little overly sweet when it's just in its raw form, so that when it's cold or when it freezes over, it's the perfect level of sweetness. Okay, so I'm going to mix this in. And don't worry, I'm using a clean spoon every time I do this. All right, that is perfect. Okay, at this point, your graham cracker crust should be done. Let's take that out of the oven and let's go ahead and fill this up. All right, so now I got my graham cracker crust. It's a little golden around, darkened a little around the edges. So now I'm going to go to my next step, which is to pour in the filling into the crust. Now, let this cool just a little bit before you do that. This has been done for a little bit while I've been making the cheesecake filling. So I'm going to take the filling, pour that right into the center. Now this cheesecake filling, if you want a really, really thick layer, can easily be doubled. You can leave the graham cracker portion alone, but you can double up the cream cheese layer if you would like. So just double up all the ingredients. Obviously that'll affect your bake time quite a bit, but if you're somebody that wants a really, really tall New York style cheesecake, you can do that. All right, now here, I'm just going to give the pan a little bit of a shake and tap to get any loose bits of air out of there. All right, and now this is ready to bake. Now, I'm going to be using a water bath. Okay, if you do not have a pan or a tray or something that you can fill up with water, you can bake this on its own. Okay, however, I have the ability to use a roasting pan to cook this in a water bath, so that's what I'm going to do. So if you are using a water bath, you're going to cook this at 300 degrees, so you're lowering the oven just a little bit. And you're going to cook this at 300 degrees from about 40 to 45 minutes, depending on the size of your pan. It may be a little bit less. I would set a timer for 30, 35 minutes until the center of the cheesecake is still a little wobbly and the edges are set. Okay, if you do not have a pan to use for a water bath, then you are going to lower the oven temperature from anywhere from 225 to 250 degrees, and you're just going to bake this like normal, but yours is probably going to take, I would say, an hour, hour and a half. It may be more. Okay, honestly, I've never made this style of cheesecake not in a water bath. So I will be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure. You have to kind of go by eyesight here, okay? When this is almost done, I'm going to show you what to look for, whether you're using the water bath method or using the dry method here. So I'm going to set the camera so that you guys can see what this looks like in the oven. All right, so I have my roasting pan with water. Now you can get the water a little bit warmed up on the stovetop if you like. What I do is I just put the roasting pan into the oven, fill it up with water, and let the oven heat it up that way. Most people, most chefs, if you look up recipes online, they will heat up the water first. To me, it doesn't make it any difference here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into the water bath very carefully, and the water should go up about halfway up the height of the cheesecake. Now, not the height of the pan, but the height of the cheesecake. So I see that is going to need a little more water. So, just gonna fill that up. All right, and then that looks good. I'm gonna put this back in, slide it carefully. You do not want to slosh water into the cheesecake at this point. Close the door, and then in about 45 minutes, we should be good to go. That being said, I'm going to set my timer for 35 minutes, just in case it gets done a little quicker than I expect. Now, while my cheesecake is baking in the oven, I'm going to show you how to do 2 dessert sauces to serve with this. Both a chocolate ganache sauce and a caramel sauce. Now, we made a caramel sauce in the sugar cooking demo. Today I'm going to show you just a slightly different version where you can apply certain techniques to help ensure that the caramel is nice and smooth. And also, it's slightly adjusted to go a little bit better with the cheesecake that we're having today. Alright, so if you are interested in making the chocolate ganache sauce, what you're going to need is 4 ounces or about half of a cup of chocolate. Now, in this case, I've got semi-sweet chocolate. Normally, with a ganache, I like to go with chopped chocolate as opposed to chocolate chips. But chocolate chips will be fine for today. 1 ounce of butter, or 1 tablespoon of butter. A pinch of kosher salt. Okay, dessert sauces do need salt, especially chocolate. And then 6 ounces or 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream. Okay, now for the caramel sauce, I have 1/2 cup of sugar, about 4 ounces there, 1/2 cup of heavy cream. I'm probably gonna up that to 6 ounces or 3/4 of a cup. I'm gonna first just go with 1/2 cup, but I'm gonna see what the consistency of the caramel is before I add more. A splash of water, 1 tablespoon of butter, and definitely at least a 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt, maybe more. As well as a optional ingredient, if I can find it, is actually, it sounds weird, but a tiny splash of an acid, whether it's vinegar or a little squeeze of lemon juice. Now, what this does, it actually helps provide an acid that will help the sugar from crystallizing and becoming brittle inside the caramel as you make it. It's an optional ingredient, you don't need it, but it does help provide a little insurance policy to keep the caramel sauce nice and smooth and clear. All right. Now, on your mise en place sheet, if you want to do this, I do not have, I'm not expecting you guys to write this out. This is just simply for you to have if you would like to take the time to make one of these sauces. I'm going to be doing both at the same time. If you are not interested in making these sauces, you can skip ahead in the video. Now, these are awesome sauces, especially with the cheesecake, but they're really good with any dessert. They're sauces that we usually are used to buying, but they're incredibly easy to make that I think it's worth it to at least know how to do it. So, what I'm going to do for the chocolate sauce is I'm going to combine my chocolate, the butter, and the kosher salt in one container, a heat-proof container. In this case, I got a liquid measuring cup. And then I've got the cream in a pot, and I'm just going to turn this onto about medium-high heat. Now, don't walk away from this. As soon as this boils, we're going to pour this right into the chocolate mixture. In the sugar bowl for the caramel, I'm going to add in a little splash of water and about a tablespoon, and then a small splash of vinegar. Again, I'm not going to make this caramel overly vinegar tasting, but rather going to use that acid just to kind of help bring out the flavor in the caramel as well as help it from crystallizing. Okay, so now what I'm just waiting for right now is for the sugar to kind of dissolve and become clear, and then I'm going to wait for this to start boiling. Do not walk away from this. Cream and milk has a tendency to start boiling over the moment you walk away, so keep an eye on that. Now, when I start to see the sugar syrup starting to boil, I'm just going to, for a few minutes, cover it with a lid. What that's going to do is going to trap in all the water that's boiling out of the syrup and help it condense and run down the sides of the pan. That will clean the sides of the pan so that no sugar crystals form on the outside, ruining our sauce. Now, as far as the cream here, it's just starting to simmer around the edges. I'm just going to wait on that. Now, once this starts to boil, I'm just going to simply pour this right over the top, and I'm not going to do anything else. I'm not going to stir this. I'm not going to move it. I'm just going to let it sit and let all of that heat start to melt the chocolate. Starting to boil, so I'm going to turn off the heat, dump that right onto the chocolate, just let it sit there. Now, as far as my caramel sauce, I'm actually going to move that over to this burner so that this process can go a little quicker and that you guys can see what's going on. Okay, I'm going to very carefully remove the lid here. And you don't want to stir this around too much. Remember, caramel is insanely hot. So I'm just going to leave that be, let it sit, and what I'm going to be looking for is when the sugar starts to just change color, turn into a nice golden brown, I'm then going to back off and lower the heat just a little bit and wait for the whole caramel to turn nice golden brown. Okay, so that's going to take a little bit. This is going to take a little bit. When we come back, this should be ready to finish, and this should be close to being done. All right, so you see a little bit of browning there. I'm just going to lower the heat just a little bit. Cover it with the lid just to wash away any sugar crystals that are on the outside. Now, as far as the chocolate sauce, well, that is finishing up. I'm just going to take a fork and I'm just going to stir this together. And at first, it's not going to look like it's going to be smooth. It's going to look like it's almost like chunks of chocolate inside this mixture. But just continue to stir. Now, if it still looks like it has some little bits of chocolate not yet melted in there, let it sit just for a little bit longer, stir it together. If it still isn't really coming together, then put it in the microwave, just nuke it for about like 10 seconds or so. But this is looking pretty good, so I'm just gonna let that sit for another few minutes while I lower the heat on my caramel. Move the lid. There we go. All right, now when your caramel is kind of starting to is nice and golden brown, and you see there's a few wisps of smoke and it's starting to smell like toasted marshmallows, I'm going to add in my cream. Be very careful because this will boil. Add in the butter, and I'm just going to simply stir this together. And now look at that, both a caramel sauce and a chocolate sauce. These sauces look good. Let them cool down a little bit, both of them, especially this one, because if you don't and you try to taste this now, it will definitely burn your mouth off. Let that cool down. Then, once they kind of cool to room temperature, then what I would do is I would just see if they're the thickness that you want. If they're a little bit too thick, you can thin them out a little bit with some cream. That way they come the consistency that you want. I'm going to add a good bunch of salt to make a salted caramel sauce here. Kind of just stir that in. And put that into a heat-proof container. And now there you go. Two sauces that look great. Really delicious, very tasty. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put them both into a squeeze bottle so that when my cheesecake comes out, I can kind of garnish and decorate this plate. Alright, with the cheesecake coming out of the oven, just going to take a look. So this is about 45-50 minutes later. When I take it out of the pan, let me just make sure the camera is centered. Perfect. When I shake the pan a little bit, the cheesecake should be fairly set, but still a little bit wobbly. Now, when I take this out, I'm going to reposition the camera so you can see this a little bit closer. But when you're taking a cheesecake out of the pan with a hot water bath, a couple things. Turn the oven off, but you just want to grab just the top part and carefully just pull up and you get it out there. Now, as far as this, don't move this. It's a lot of hot, almost boiling water. Just my suggestion, just put it back in the oven, turn the oven off, let it cool down. All right, so I'm gonna reposition the camera so you can see the cheesecake. All right, so now if you take a close look, when I move it side to side, the cheesecake is still a little bit wobbly. It's mostly set around the edges, but it just has a little bit of wobble to it. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to let it sit. I'm going to go put it into the fridge, and then I'm just going to let it cool for at minimum 3-4 hours. Yes, I know it sounds like a lot. For me, I'm just going to put this into the fridge, let it cool overnight. I will come back to this tomorrow morning. I'll unwrap it and then get it plated, and then that will be it. One other thing I'm just going to do is very carefully remove the foil, just in case any water leaks through the pan. This looks like it's fine. It looks like it didn't leak too much, but just something I like to do, especially if you're using a springform pan. Now, if you're using a regular cake pan, then this is no worry. You could just put it right into the water bath, take it out. You'll have a little bit of extra work to come tomorrow to get the cheesecake out of the pan, but you'll be fine. All right, so I'm just going to take this, very carefully lift this out, and then I'll put this into the fridge, and then come tomorrow, this will be ready to serve. Okay, here we are the next day. So I got my cheesecake, and now if I fill the top of it, that is set. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, before I release the pan, I'm going to take a spatula or a butter knife, just put it right in, just dip it into some lightly warm water, just run the spatula around the outside of the cheesecake. Now if you're using a regular cake pan, this may be a little tricky for you. Hopefully you really greased up the bottom of the pan and used some parchment paper. But this should unlatch, and I should be able to lift this up, no problem. Look at that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to slice it. I'm going to take a regular knife, and if you have a non-stick springform pan or cake pan, you probably don't want to use a knife with this. This is actually stainless steel, so I'm actually okay to use a knife with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the knife through a little bit of warm water. This is just to ensure nice clean slices. So then I'm going to slice down. Turn the cake over. And then slice down. Now, before I take my slice of cheesecake out, what I've done with my dessert sauces is I put both the caramel and the ganache in squeeze bottles here. The caramel sauce I did have to thin out a little bit more with some extra cream when I put it into the fridge. It thickened up a little more than I would like. The ganache was perfect though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to garnish the plate here. You can garnish this however you want, obviously. But I'm going to show you a real cool thing to do here. Alright, so you can do a bunch of different things with your sauces here. One of the first things I'm going to do, now you can just do a simple swirl, and that is fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a few dots of my sauce all around the plate. And then, see, it's not perfect, that's okay. Then I'm going to take my ganache sauce. I'm just going to put a couple dots right in between. Now what we can do is we can then take a toothpick and then run that through the sauce and create kind of a interesting, crisscross sort of swirl pattern. Another thing I can do is just take a plate, put a drizzle of chocolate sauce. Now that's good as is, but you can also take a toothpick, make that kind of into a lattice pattern. Or another thing you can do is just simply put a couple dots on the plate. And just keep it simple that way. Okay, there's all sorts of things you can do here. I am gonna go with my lattice pattern here. Place that right onto the cake, and then I'll just do a small drizzle of my caramel sauce. Now, of course, the possibilities as far as plating are endless here. So play around here. You'll definitely earn some extra credit if you take the time to do this, but that is our cheesecake. So if you have any questions, please let me know. When you head back into the class, I'm going to give you guys instructions on how you can do this lab over the break if you would like. All right, and that is it for today.